So not to make a plug for Bible study, but one of the reasons you should study the Bible is because there's just not time on Sunday morning to do everything that you need to do with these stories. With these parables, we call them. And the dictionary describes the word parable, defines the word parable as a simple story used to illustrate a moral or theological point. But as I'm about to show you, that story, or as I think I already showed you, that story is anything but simple. It contains ambiguity. And that ambiguity, Jesus put in there to invite the listening audience to engage with the story, to want to understand what the point of it is and not just hear it. And by being invited into an engagement, we are brought into what I like to call a discomfort zone, where we wonder, is Jesus talking about me? Have I got it, as in everything, or even a little bit of something, all wrong? Because the first step towards transformation and change, which is what Jesus was all about and is all about, is being able to change yourself. You need to change how you see things, how you think, how you feel, your emotions. And this is hard work. The parable of the sowers we've heard is a perfect example of one of these stories of discomfort. And it's a very familiar one to anyone who's been involved with Christianity for any amount of time. And yet there's always something more there. A sower went out to sow seeds. Now that would have been very familiar to Jesus' audience because they were all rural folk. But we can picture it too as well, sort of a rustic ideal of a farmer with a sack over his shoulder, casting seeds this way and that. If you grew up like me in the 1970s, maybe you imagine Charles Ingalls from Little House on the Prairie wading through the tall wheat. And Jesus goes on. Some seeds fell on the path, and the birds ate them up. And we think to ourselves, hearing this story, oh, that's too bad. What a waste of good seed. And then our mind clicks over because we're in church. Oh, that's right. This is a parable, so it must be about people. Yep, just like Matthew with his interpretation, those are the seeds, must be the people who just don't get a break in life and literally get eaten up by the forces of life, which Jesus calls the birds. Life sure isn't fair. It's too bad about those folks. And the sower moves on, and so do we. And Jesus says, some seeds fell on rocky ground, and because they didn't have roots, they quickly grew and were scorched by the sun and withered away. And we think to ourselves, oh boy, this farmer is really not very careful where he sows. Oh yeah, that's right, this is a parable, so it must be about people. Those people, the ones who are scorched, must be the folks who get burned out by life. Or, as Matthew says, the people who are religious enthusiasts but don't have any staying power. And we think to ourselves, well, I've gone through those times in life where I've fallen away and been burned out, but I got myself turned around. It's sort of too bad about those folks. They really need to have deeper roots to get through life. Maybe their parents didn't give them a solid enough foundation. Too bad about those folks. Life sure isn't fair. And the sower moves on, and so do we. And Jesus tells us, other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. And we think to ourselves, this farmer sure has bad land. Oh, that's right, this is a parable, so this must be about people. Well, that's a true statement. Life certainly is full of thorns of all kinds. There's the thorns of our workloads, the thorns of our family responsibilities, the thorns of our bills to pay, the thorns of pandemics to cope with, the worries that we have about the news and about politics. And we think to ourselves, well, yes, I've certainly felt choked by life myself from time to time. But maybe today I have my life in order. So I'm okay. It's too bad about those folks who have it so hard. They ought to take some time out and just smell the roses. And the sower moves on, and so do we. And Jesus tells us that other seeds fell on good soil and yielded grain, some 100-fold, some 60-fold, some 30-fold. So everything from a pumpkin to corn on the cob. Out of one seed come many seeds. And we think to ourselves, ah, yes, there I am. I have been very blessed by life. The things I have done with my life have really prospered. You know, I never really wondered why God chose me to be in the good soil. You know, the truth is, God probably didn't. I probably earned it myself. And as for all the people, most of the people in the world who aren't fruitful, well, it's just bad luck, or they need to work harder. Life sure isn't fair. It's too bad about those folks. The sower moves on, and so do we. And the truth is, I've read this parable since I was a Sunday school boy, and I've preached it just this way, any number of times, exactly the way Matthew interprets it. And I'm here to tell you this morning there's one big problem with that. I've had it all wrong. It was a very small, insular, self-righteous understanding, and that is not at all how Jesus thought and lived and invited us to live in the kingdom of God. Because the story is not about me. It's not even about us. It's not even about people. The story is about the sower who went out to sow seeds. Clearly, God. And the act of sowing is Jesus' way of describing God's steadfast love, God's astounding abundance of grace in all places, in all circumstances, at all times. Just showers it everywhere. It's not what we do, but what God is doing. Let anyone with ears to hear listen. What Jesus should have said, perhaps, is with anyone with eyes, open them and see reality as it really is. The truth of the matter is, when the birds are eating you up in life, and the sun is scorching you in life, and the thorns are choking you in life, the last thing you're able to think about, or you want to think about, because the pain of the scorching and the eating and the choking is so much more immediate. The last thing you think of is how astoundingly, abundantly gracious God is with you every moment of every day, even with the birds. Because the truth is, when life's not going well, what your mind wants to think about is your misery, your disappointment, the unfairness of life, how I never get a break, how life is so hard. Or, if everything's really easy, how easily I could lose all my money in the stock market or lose my job or everything else that our mind wants us to think about it. But if we hear the parable the way Jesus tells us in the first place, and our eyes are opened and our ears are listening, then we learn to look for the seeds that are falling everywhere. Seeds of new and abundant life, of healing, of new vision, ability to see, of strength in our legs where we're able to stand again, of manna from heaven or a few loaves and fish that are feeding the multitudes rather than scarcity. Resurrection from the dead. We suddenly begin to see that the birds and the scorching and the thorns do not have the last word unless we give it to them. Every moment of every day, we have the opportunity through faith to choose life, to choose to see life, to choose to live life, rather than to dwell on death. Let me give you some examples from my own life. I have had my share of birds pecking at me and eating me up in my life. And the truth of the matter is that for long stretches of time in my life, when this was what was going on, all I could think about was how they were ruining my life. And I look back now, and I think to myself, boy, I missed weeks. I missed months. I missed even years of God's grace showering upon me because I was so stuck on the birds. But the moment I snapped out of it and either shooed the birds away or let them go or let them continue pecking, I could see what I'd been missing. I know a lot of people who've had serious illnesses like cancer, like alcoholism, like depression. And what all of them tell me is that in the rear view mirror, they are able to see the blessings of these things. That before they had their hardship, they did not appreciate how good life was. But when the cancer or the alcoholism or the depression was past, every day, in every way, was just savoring the goodness of life and how important it is to live fully and joyfully as much as possible. And what's most important is these people tell me they are no longer afraid of death. A sower sowing seeds. And speaking of death, which is the worst heartache in life, to lose someone you love, I have to tell you this morning that I have discovered that even though I mourn those I love who I've lost, I have discovered in my mourning that new possibilities open up and are set free that were not there when the other one was still alive with us. I discover the richness and meaning of life lived with that person. I discover new possibilities. Like suddenly, in some way, I'm allowed to grow up now that my mother is no longer with me. Or for others I know, now that a sibling is passed, there's no need for that competition anymore. It's a reframing, a sower sowing seeds. And finally, I know plenty of people within 5 miles of here, myself included from time to time, who live with every visible evidence of being in very good soil indeed, of having every possible blessing of life. And they don't feel that way about it. In fact, when you speak, mostly what you hear is grousing and complaining and comparisons and jealousy and worrying and fretting. And here is the biggest lesson. Because the fruit that Jesus is talking, the abundance that Jesus is talking about, is not the fruit of our labors, but the fruit of God's Spirit, the fruit of justice, the fruit of mercy, the fruit of peace and compassion and kindness and love. In the end, the ultimate seed our sower sows in our lives is none other than Jesus himself, who comes to us when we're surrounded by the birds, who wraps us in his arms when we're being scorched by the sun of life, who parts the thorns that are choking us, and rejoices with us as we bear the fruits of the Spirit. Like this morning, I pray as we revisit this parable, and says to us, all of this and so much more is yours already if you can just see it. If you can just recognize God's astounding, steadfast love, which is the true foundation of reality. Which is why Jesus says, for those who have, much more will be given. But if you can't see it, if you can't believe it, if you don't trust, if it's just too fearful, then even what you have will just slip through your fingers. That's how I read the parable this year. Amen. If you have a prayer that you'd like me to pray aloud,